God Valley comes to its climax as we see a four-way battle royale with Roger, Garb, Xebec, and even now, King Emu. But as usual, there's a lot of subtle details that get lost in all the chaos, such as a better understanding at how Emu's shared immortality works with Domi Reversi, or the special trait of the Devi clan. So let's once again break down this chapter together. On the cover, Yamato's cover story at last comes to an end after 44 chapters, having begun all the way during the late stages of Egghead. While some might assume that this was the longest cover story ever, it is in fact not. The From the Decks of the World cover story was 48 chapters long, the stories of the self-proclaimed Straw Hat Grand Fleet was 46 chapters long, and even for individual characters, Karibu's Kehihihi in the New World was 46 chapters long as well. So Child of Oni Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage only comes in as the fourth longest cover story in the series. On the cover itself, Yamato stands proudly in front of the Flower Capital's Shogun Castle with the skewer of Odin in hand, which Momonosuke behind is partaking in as well. Yamato also now wears a cape with the moon, the symbol of the Kosuki or Moonlight clan, resembling Odin, a little bit more in his latter years with the cape. He exclaims, "Luffy dono, today too the Wano country is at peace, de gozaru." As clearly seen, this expression doesn't exactly sound natural coming from Yamato, sounding a lot like a fancy samurai, much like how Kinemon speaks, after he and the other scabbards were educated by Yasuye to become more dignified, which can be noted in things such as using the suffix dono to refer to Luffy, akin to the English sir, or the de gozaru, an archaic samurai form of the common gozaimasu used in Japanese. Needless to say, Yamato has fully embraced the weeb life. The more interesting factor though is that Yamato isn't really leaving Wano for the moment being, as some had speculated might happen, and aside from Ulti and page 1, the latter of which isn't even visible on this cover, it doesn't seem like anyone else is joining the pass for the moment being. So we'll have to see if Yamato is to remain as a character of Wano forevermore, or if something in the future will move the entire group, Momonosuke and Zunisha included. Speaking of Ulti though, we can see Kinemon looking suspiciously at her as in a "have I seen you somewhere before" kind of way, funnily enough. We get a simplified map of God Valley, which helps us better orient ourselves with all the chaos going on. At the center is of course the titular Valley, which is where Shaki was being held, which cuts across the island from the northwestern side to the southeastern side. From the west came the Roger Pirates, entering into the valley from the top side, while from the east came the Rocks Pirates, entering the valley from the lower side, with the Marines pursuing them from the south. On the other hand, however, Xebec went around on the side of the mountain on the north, as he was instead looking for Eris and Teach, while all the other rocks were busy going after Shaki at the center. There it seems he came up against Garling, who appeared to be on the northwestern entrance to the valley, right next to the treasure cache, as he was likely guarding it from pirates to ensure they didn't steal them from the celestial dragons, particularly as many of the treasures would have been meant for him if he was going to emerge as the champion. As we will see later though, for being quite the champion, Garling couldn't quite stand up to Xebec, which is why the treasures were left unguarded. It does seem though, from what we see later in the chapter, that there are two treasure storage warehouses listed as number 1 and 2. In the first one is where the devil fruits are found, where on the other one all the gold and treasures are found instead, being located right behind the game stage, what served as the stage representing the tournament. Judging by their location, it would seem the second storage warehouse is the one indicated here on the map with all the treasures, whereas the first one with the devil fruits is slightly more inland on the other end of the mountain. The Roger Pirates are similarly now trying to retreat with Shaki in hand and trying to take what remaining treasures they can before they can escape. They seemingly tell the rest of the crew to move their ship to the southwest, or on the side of the mountain, perhaps to keep it away from enemy fire. Rayleigh runs with Shaki in his arms because Summers had hit her in the leg last chapter, so she must be struggling to walk. Other pirates want to lay claim to her, but they are stopped by Spencer and Mil Payne, as well as Shiki, who doesn't want his Shaki-chuan to get hurt. Whitebeard also decides to move the focus to the treasures instead of Shaki because he too believes it's the best for her, and so he and Ganzui press forward. Within the first warehouse, we see once again play out the scene we saw in Kuma's flashback, where he and Ivankov attain 2 Del fruits. Lilin interrupts by grabbing the Uowonomi or fish fruit model Seiryu, while Kuma manages to escape eating the Nikyu or pawpaw fruit. We get a brief cutaway in which we see that Ivankov seemingly escaped as well, though we aren't quite told how he was able to escape from Big Mom before regrouping with Kuma. Still, Lin rejoices as she decides to give this fruit to Katakuri so that her crew can become powerful in the future. This is a bit of a timeline plot hole though, because according to the Viver cards, Katakuri ate the Mochi Mochi no Mi at age 5, 43 years ago. That was in 1481, 5 years before the God Valley incident in 1486, so Katakuri should already have a fruit. Now, it's not the first time that Oda has introduced something in a Viver card that turned out to be an error, such as Caesar Clown's age being listed as 40, only to later retcon it to 55, since otherwise Caesar could not have been a member of Mads. So I'm assuming he'll just change it to Katakuri having eaten the Mochi Mochi no Mi sometime after the God Valley incident. Still, Dragon Katakuri does not come to pass, as Kaido comes in and knocks Linlin straight in the face, all to attain the fruit for himself. Linlin is enraged, clashing with Kaido and causing a large explosion with some Haki lightning. This does refrain quite a bit of what Big Mom described as of this event in chapter 999, however. I still think of you like a little brother. On the day rocks fell to ruin at God Valley, I gave you that mythical model of the Uo no Mi. You owe me for life, Kaido. Her line of I gave you that fruit though can also be more appropriately translated as I let you have that fruit, as Big Mom was basically saving face and acting like it's only thanks to her that Kaido got the fruit and he needs to pay her back for stealing it. Particularly as in 907, Big Mom asked to have Luffy's head before Kaido by telling him, and let's not forget, you still owe me big time, Kaido, to which he replied, that was in the past, but she remarked, but it's a lifelong debt. Again, we were clarified in 999 that this was the fruit that Kaido ate, so it seems that Big Mom was bitter enough about this moment that she kept nagging Kaido about this debt for the rest of their lives. At the same time, the Rock Spirits continue to struggle at the island center. On the right, what seems to be Stussy shooting at some opponents. On the left, Barbel is fighting against someone with a hammer. And at the center, Kyo is getting beaten up by a certain someone who actually looks a lot like Marco the Phoenix? Now, Marco was very much alive at the time, but he was still only 7 years old, as he is 45 after all. So this likely isn't him, but it does sure look a lot like him. So is this another case of Nepo piece, with this being a part who happened to be the father of Marco, or is this really just another pineapple-looking fellow? Meanwhile, Garp is running with seemingly Bogart by his side, who is holding a Denden Mushi in his hand so that Garp can talk with Sengoku. He questions Sengoku on the Genocide Tournament, but Sengoku insists that anyone inquiring into it has been eliminated by the Celestial Dragons. It would seem that Garp indeed wasn't aware of the details of the Genocide Tournament, and when he said the Celestial Dragons' school trip, he didn't realize the extent of what it is that they intended to do. And this means that Garp wasn't aware or complicit to these things, as many Marines likely aren't either, with the existence of these tournaments being a myth to most, like Whitebeard mentioned. But of course, we do know that Garp would still remain in the Marines nonetheless, so there's a lot you can still argue in that regard. Sengoku did tell us in 957 though that the Celestial Dragons wanted to get rid of Garp in one way or another, but weren't able because after God Valley he became such a foundational stone for the public image of the Marines as the hero of the Marines that they just couldn't get rid of him. On Jabek's side, instead, the situation looks quite grim. He has been able to locate and rescue Eris and Teach, but all the other members of the Devi clan have instead been dummy reversed. Jabek also exclaims that these guys won't die, and as we see, he injured Garling, basically cutting off part of his head, but it simply regenerates as Garling appears to have immortality too. This is a clarification I had been waiting for quite a long while, because it helps us distinguish the powers that Imu can confer. On one hand, there is the power of immortality, or Fujibi, immortality, invulnerability, where their bodies continuously regenerate. We've seen this power applied to the 5 elder planets and several of the god knights such as Gunko, Summers, Maffy, and now Garling. However, separately there's also the power of Perennial Youth, which will not mention directly to those we've seen exhibit it. Unlike Immortality, which was directly used as a term to refer to them, it is clearly very evident by the fact that they don't age across the decades. This was seen in Nerona Imu, who has seemingly been alive since the Void Century, in the 5 elder planets who retain the same appearance for several decades, such as Saturn looking the same here in God Valley, or even 200 years ago during the Iron Giant incident, and finally Gunko, who also looks just as young as now all those decades later, and clearly must have been alive around less than a century or so, since she knew Brook when she was little, someone who is currently 90 years old. However, as we see here, Garling is immortal, but he is not perennially youthful, as he did age across the past decades. Similarly, Summers was likely already mortal here too, just like Maffy, but he too did age up to the present. present. So this clearly distinguishes that Immortality and Perennial Youth as different powers despite having some overlap. Perennial Youth itself is likely connected to the Perennial Youth operation, Furou Shujutsu, the ultimate ability of the Ope Ope no Mi, where the user can sacrifice their entire lifespan to make someone else perennially youthful. Ivankov already very clearly implied that's what Emo used to be perennially youthful, but I wonder if the Immortality is part of this power, or if the Immortality is a completely separate ability. Particularly, I wonder if the Perennial Youth that the Gorosei and Gunko have isn't one that was manually conferred to all of them every time with the Ope Ope no Mi always sacrificing a user, particularly as the fruit had been lost and passing hands in the recent decades, as seen in Lost Flashback, and as mentioned even before, as a very famous doctor had it. So it would have been weird if the government had monopolized it for so long. To me, it could make more sense that by making a pact with Emu, those with the mark can attain part of Emu's powers, such as attaining immortality and, or in the case of a select few, being extended perennial youth as well, though it seems Emu is only willing to do this with an even more incredibly select few individuals, with Gunko being the only non-Gorosei we've seen with this power, and later also seeing Saturn having both immortality and youth removed to the point he just became a skeleton. And this also makes me wonder now that Garling was promoted if he too will become for perennial youth, as he wouldn't make that great of a leader if he died of old age in a decade or so. This however also makes me wonder who Emu's other powers can extend to, as we see later that Emu is able to take over Saturn's body as well, just like he did with Gunko. But again, these are two who have been granted perennial youth as well, so is this only for those who have been granted to that point, or can Emu do it on anyone with the mark? Though this time on God Valley, Gunko was also present and Emu instead chose to take over Saturn's body. This could also explain how Gunko's arrow-like powers resemble the same arrow that Emu used to kill Cobra. Anyway, what's interesting about the Immortality and Perennial Youth is that these also seem to extend to those affected by Domi Reversi. We saw that when Emu blew up Brogy's hand, the Domi Reversi allowed him to regenerate it, and Emu even stated that in exchange for Fake's lifespan you will receive an immortal body, which seems to suggest those affected by Domi Reversi and obtaining both immortality and perennial youth. But how is this the case, and how does it differ from what we've seen in other celestial dragons who don't appear to be brainwashed? Or are they, considering that Gunko also appeared to have been brainwashed to a certain extent? How come Garling does not get the perennial youth, but those affected by Domi Reversi do? Is Domi Reversi something Emu only intends to gather fighters quickly and then just kills them off? Or are they meant to remain servants for eternity? Either way, that's a lot of questions, but focusing on Ares, we see that she is confused by seeing the members of the clan she joined turning like that, referring to the large guy with the straw hat some celestial dragons thought could be a buccaneer as Oyaji or Pops, and the other large lady as Baba or Granny. It's possible thus that these could be Jebek's own parents, which is interesting as the father seems to carry a straw hat as we've pointed out before, though definitely a bit different than Roger's here. Interestingly, Jebek tells Ares that if anyone bearing the name Davy were to be caught, they'd be made to suffer pain so unbearable they would make even hell feel tame by comparison. The way this is worded in Japanese make it simply sound like those of the Davy clan would be tortured by the government, but I wonder if perhaps he meant this more literally, that those of the Davy clan have more sensitivity to pain, particularly as Teach mentioned that he absorbs pain more than normal people, which many attributed to his fruit, but while he did say, my body absorbs all pain and that pain is amplified in the process, in the context of his fruit, it's still possible it could be a trait of his unique body instead. I am perhaps looking too much into this and Jebek only meant of them being persecuted and tortured by the government, but it's worth at least keeping it in mind. It's also worth noting that Ares claims, I understand really well what the fate of this clan is, which adds more to the mystery. Speaking more of Ares, she however feels that she needs to prove she can run away on her own, and she doesn't want to burden Jebek either, so the two instead make the promise of meeting one day again at Lulusia of all places. I wonder if this really is just a random destination for them to meet again at, particularly as Lulusia is close to Marijois and the Red Line on the side of Paradise, practically the complete opposite end from somewhere like the West Blue, or if there is some deeper purpose for them meeting there. After all, as we were told, Jebek would end up supposedly losing his life on this island, while Teach would grow up in Shadeport until he'd asked to join the Whitebeard Pirates 28 years ago, some decade after this incident, later claiming that he joined that ship because he wanted to find the Yami Yami no Mi somewhere out there in the world. It would seem that at this this point, his mother had already died, so I wonder if she even survived this incident to begin with, or if she died later down the line, but I'd imagine she died not long after this, perhaps not even reaching Lulusia, which would leave Teach as an orphan and suffering across his childhood, crying to the moon just like we saw Oda draw him. Again, I do have to wonder if Whitebeard did know that Teach was Jabek's son, and if Lulusia bears any further significance here with the Davy clan. Perhaps by coincidence, or by fate, a future subordinate of Blackbeard, Peachbeard, would raid Lulusia many years later before he was stopped by the revolutionaries, and Ace had also looked for Blackbeard in Lulusia as well, so is all of that just a coincidence? As Edis and Teach run away though, Teach looks back at his father and will remember his efforts here, and we see a very clear parallel between Dragon running away with a baby Shanks and Edis running away with a baby Teach, two different figures who would oppose each other in the future as two of the most key pivotal players, one helping give rise to Luffy to bring the dawn, and the other one wishing to usurp Imu's control. One of them would even further scar the other one, interlocking their fates for long to come. Meanwhile, the Rocks pirates locate the treasures in the first storage behind the game stage, and we see Ganzui trying to take the treasure too, but he is stopped by Gaban. We know that poor Ganzui will, in fact, not make it out of this incident, so I wonder who he'll die to. I also wonder when exactly Summers is going to find Gaban. It is also among these treasures that Shanks will be hidden inside of a chest, so I wonder just when Dragon will get the chance to hide in one of them. We see Saturn standing on a hill pondering to himself, thinking about Kuma, which indicates that the meeting between the two has already taken place, meaning that we're finally done with all the scenes that we had already seen on God Valley. Kuma likely got away with his powers, moving to another side of the island to help the others. Saturn gets a mental phone call from Imu, however, who asks if Rocks is dead, but on the contrary, it seems things are only getting more out of hand for the government, as Saturn worries all these events could give rise to new threats, as evidently seen in the rise of Roger and the survival of both Shanks and Teach. Imu replies to this by insisting that they can't let it happen, even though they kinda will. We briefly cut away to see Kuma rescuing several of the slaves on God Valley with his powers. As we were told, Kuma was able to save about 500 people from the incident, even though we don't know how fortunate the other 100,000 rabbits on the island really ended up being, particularly as the entire island supposedly vanished. After this, supposedly Kuma would also leave with Genie and Ivankov, and we don't know if this has happened yet towards the end of this chapter, but Ivankov mentioned being curious what happened on the island by reading the newspaper, so maybe they got a slight glimpse before deciding to dip, but didn't quite fully see what truly happened here. As after all, a massive black lightning bolt hits the island. The cracking of the thunder seen through the sound effect Bidi Bidi extends to the entire island, where Roger, Garp, and Jabek all notice it. Cutting away for a moment though, we see Peter Mu, joined by Seagull, Ganryu, and Yui, referring to Roger as Okashira, which means a boss or chief. This is the same unique term that Shanks' crew uses to address him, and also the giant warrior pirates use to address Dorian Broggy, so you can imagine that Roger probably passed on this term to Shanks, and it's why he would use it with his crew in the future instead of captain. Meanwhile, Jabek has defeated Garling once again, off-screening him in such a fashion that even his son would be proud, but he also was forced to raise his hand against his very own clan, given what he said and the bloodied hand with a chain as seen on the ground, having had to quite brutally fight back against the very parents who raised him. He is however joined by Whitebeard, who is willing to help him out because Jabek always pays his tab. This is more significant than it seems, as Marco claimed in 909 that Whitebeard never paid the tab because he was always sending money back to his hometown of Sphinx, and I wonder if at this time back then he was already funneling money back to them. Kaidou also joins them, now fully transformed as a dragon. Some people debated all the way back during Wano that the fruit actually would begin as a koi fish and then transform into a dragon when fully awakened or whatnot, but clearly as we see here, the fruit lets Kaidou transform right from the get-go. As we've mentioned before, the reason it's classified as a fish is simply because the word for dragon, Ryu, is already used for the dinosaur line of fruits, since Ryu can also mean soar. Either way, this sets the stage for the real God Valley incident we were told so much about, where Roger and Garp would team up against the Rocks and take Jabek down once and for all. That is, of course, the version of history we're told about. But reality was different, as clearly this wasn't a mere battle on both sides, but a veritable God Valley battle royale, as one fourth key player joins the ring, King Imu, possessing Saturn's body to the point of emerging from the top of his Gyuki body like a triangular shape very reminiscent of the usual form we've seen so many times. As we expected, Imu directly takes the stage, stage on the God Valley battlefield. It makes sense that this part of God Valley was one that even Sengoku could not speak of, and the part of the incident that no one would be allowed to talk about. This does make me wonder though how many of the current parties actually got to see Imu and how many were even aware of who this entity is. At the very least, Jebek clearly knows who this is, claiming that this is the world. And as we know, so too would his son's ultimate objective be one and the same: the world.